Hello and welcome to Decorate It. My name is Mary and this is Wes. And tonight we're going to be talking about EVA grips. So Wes, I wanted to start off with what is your favorite kind of EVA grip to do? Like what style?
It'd have to be like a random abstract or one like this.
That's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, I like the colors in this one in particular.
Yeah, I think that's what makes me really like this grip is I enjoy that navy blue with that kind of charcoal color and the lime green.
Definitely.
It definitely, but this is what's kind of, I guess, a lava acrylic, I think is what they were calling it,
Something like that.
where it was basically a kaleidoscope, which all these names are being referenced to things that Billy has named some of the grips and styles that he came up with. I think that's supposed to be a lava
even
acrylic.
the ones like this where it's just
That one's just a hot mess. I made 3 of those at once, and they were all failures.
I like them to make you want to turn it and look at it.
Yeah, I just didn't like this. And overall, like these were actually the first 3. I was trying something, I screwed them up.
What's your favorite type to do?
I really enjoyed this one and like the random abstract one. So like this guy, I really like to do these, but the ones that I actually think are the most challenging are the overlays. So this is actually my Alice in Wonderland, the very first grip that I tried to do an overlay with, and to be honest, it has a lot of mess ups because it's the one I went back and did it again, and that one is the one that is on the rod, and it came out much better. But just I took an X-Acto knife and hand cut all these little tiny pieces and glued everything back together, so it was just an absolute pain.
Oh, I know. I heard. I heard time and time and time again how much of a pain it was.
It was an absolute pain. But on that, like, so what are all the different kind of styles? Like, we have a bunch of this stuff laying on the table. Like, where do these particular pieces come from?
What do you mean?
Like, how do we have all these different things? Like,
Oh, it was trying different things. Like this one was trying to be a kind of sunbeam, sun ray,
like sunrise, like
sunrise, sunset. This one was just us testing different lines and really different densities.
angles.
That one, I don't remember why we made this one.
We just wanted to see what would happen.
But I mean, it ended up being cool, but
It's very
I think
odd.
we were attempting some sort of fish scale style.
Which we got really giant looking ones, kind of.
Yeah. And the seam's off on the black back here. And a lot of these ended up being fails that we did that we noticed mistakes that were blatant and immediately said, no, we're not going to do that one.
Well, like this one, for instance, so it looks super complicated, and you see all the little chunk pieces that are turning. This is really set up where the block, one piece of it was just like this one, where it's 2 put together, like a little Frankenstein kind of thing. And then we chopped it into equal pieces and then glued it back together as it turned. So very much like how you would kind of work with cork, if you will.
And segmenting and all that. And then this one, we were testing random abstracts and how far of an angle you could go.
Well, and practicing our alignment of the random abstracts.
This is about the state that it started getting better on this one. Because, you know, if you start doing custom EVA grips, you're going to have errors and problems. And that one was trying to take the Veris swirl and see how it would do with a black background on a fly grip style, which that's back when we first really started building and found out real quick as to why you don't use foam on fly rods. So that's why that one's still sitting there. And I forgot about this one.
Yeah, that little guy that I did.
This one we took, so any of the inlays that we did, we took and put white and black in so that it gives it like almost a feather look to it.
That's the look I was going for, but the way that I put it together,
Right here in particular.
there's a big section where, like, when I was sanding it down to get it to the size and stuff, it ends up like blacking out and making this big massive line. So all of those little tiny ones have like a cute side and a really ugly side. They were a big failure. But like all of these that are sitting here on the table, these were all like test runs for things that we just wanted to try, and we sat down and glued it up, and we have them. There's nothing particularly wrong with them. You just have to figure out if you're going to use them. Some of them have like, I don't even think we kept the really bad ones.
No, a lot of them we ended up either cutting up or destroying in practicing, really.
Yeah, like sanding.
Because a lot of it has comes down to practicing with sanding too, because if you sand it wrong, it ends up
It gets
hand me that
chunked.
one.
This one got real bad.
Ends up like this, where there's literal waves in the EVA
Yeah.
because of how you sanded it.
But we finally figured out that it was one, we were taking the material down too far with the skew.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were going after it with very aggressively with sandpaper. The sandpaper was getting really hot and it started ripping out chunks.
Mm-hmm. And it starts like rolling over each other and that's forming the waves.
Yeah, so we had a lot of things we were doing wrong. Changed a few stuff, and then now we ended up with a smoother version where it looks like it's supposed to be when it gets done. What's some of the pros and cons about using EVA on like the bass rods or on like saltwater rods?
Easier to clean, easier to maintain. If you're doing very intricate patterns as far as building them, you have to ream it to fit. You can't just take this and shove it on the rod as hard as you can and expect it to expand. One of these seams is going to explode on you mid-flight. So that's definitely a con side of it. You have to ream it to fit. You cannot just put some alcohol on it and expect it to go down.
No, you're gonna bust every single seam.
You know, a pro and con is it's softer than other materials. Which, if you don't want the softness of it, then by all means, don't be using EVA. But if you want something that's a little softer on the hand, a little more forgiving, then EVA is definitely something you want to look at. And the more intricate that you make it, the stiffer it gets.
Yeah. So like
there's going to be ridges, there's going to be lines. So like the moment you grab this and really squeeze on it, that line that's running right here, you can feel the glue lines.
Mm-hmm. They get stiff, but not so stiff that it's uncomfortable because hopefully
It's just a distinct difference.
Yeah, it doesn't give as much as the other versions would. If instead of working with just turning down like your EVA stuff, and you bought round, for most people they're buying solid colors and putting it on the rods, and don't have a bandsaw, they don't have a lathe, they don't have all this expensive equipment, and they want to get started working on custom grips. How can they use the round pieces that they bought, and like how can they cut them apart and put them back together?
Of like 10, 20, 30 pound braid, put the EVA on some type of mandrel or rod or dowel or something that you can put it in your rod building chuck, spin it as fast as you can, take that braid and zip, cut little slices.
I do believe the Advanced Custom Rod Building by Dale Clemens, he has a tool that he made, and he shows you how to make it and talks about it, and actually talks about cutting the pieces so that they're actually the same size, and it's not you just kind of guesstimating how big it is.
And you can take and make, segmented grips where, like, say you had the ones like this, where it's kind of a wood grain look, but it's EVA. You can take and make little slices and then turn those ever so slightly each time and get a different pattern out of it.
We did that.
On one of our challenge builds.
The very first international challenge build.
And the grip looks good.
Grip does look good.
Everything else about that rod build was...
we were learning. Especially
we're not showing that one.
The worst part about that rod is just the footballs that we had on the guides.
Well, that and we used guides that were too heavy for the blank itself.
Yeah.
So it really, like, when you go to throw it and cast it, it kind of gives that, like, vibration to it where it just keeps going because the weight of the guides are just making it move.
And we built that rod on, like, over 10 years ago?
Something like that.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute.
It was like 2012, 2013.
It was right after I had just started. I think we did it in 2013, 2014.
Yeah, because it was way before you were pregnant. So.
Yeah. It was one of those years, but it was a long time ago. So we've learned a lot since then. But so when you're gluing these together, what kind of glue do you use?
EVA to EVA?
Yes.
Contact cement.
Okay. So contact cement. How many coats do you put on it?
We do 2. We do the first layer and like go through the entire pattern, one layer. Used to be we'd both take a smoke break, and by the time we finished with that, it would be dry. So give it 5, 10, 15 minutes.
Usually it takes. It's like it depends on how hot or cold.
How hot, how cold.
But you let it dry until it's tacky. Like you don't want to see any more wetness.
You don't want it juicy.
You don't want it juicy. You
juicy
don't want any kind of wetness on it. It's going to be tacky. It's going to change its sheen. And you want to do thin coats. You don't want to do heavy coats. You don't want to saturate it.
Do a second coat.
Then you do a second coat.
Completely dry.
Yep.
And then smack them together.
And when you're aligning everything, so EVA compresses. So this is something we learned the hard way initially. So if you're pushing with uneven pressure when you're putting these joints and stuff back together, you're actually getting like a woof in it. So
And it can distort where things meet up.
so you got to do like even pressure, and you don't have to like sit on it or anything like that. You just have to push them together, make sure everything's nice and tight. And even, and make sure all of the edges, that's probably the most important thing, is make sure every single edge has glue on it and is put together. So it's not
'cause the last thing you want is to take a block, turn it down, and then you get down to where it's not glued, and then have to sit there and take a toothpick and
hope for the best.
hope for the best by putting it back together. Like, we've done that too. Don't worry.
I mean, I think that's part of rod building. You have to figure out like how to screw up or fix your screw ups, or toss the project completely. So we talked a little bit about rounds and blocks. Like, which one do you prefer to work with? Because they both have their pros and cons, as far as I'm concerned.
It depends on what I'm doing, honestly. Like, if I'm just building a generic rod that is not getting very intricate, it's gonna be round.
What, you're gonna use a round
Yeah.
instead of turning it and doing something?
Yeah.
Well, it would make sense to have a couple trim bands on the ends of it.
But you can do all that with round EVA. You don't have to have blocks. Now, if you're going into abstracts and overlays and this and that and all these other things, then you need blocks.
Yeah.
Pretty much you have to do it. Like, you can't get different. You can't get as good of angles to do abstracts on grips with rounds versus blocks.
Well, and you've already got it. It's turned down to its diameter too, so you have very, very little room to sand it, which that's going to be an issue. But I don't like working with rounds with the center bore already done, because it's so hard to get all the centers to completely line up
That's
again.
why I said if I'm doing it, it's not going to be something fancy. It's going to be like trims. And that's it.
A couple little pieces, but
Because then I can glue them on a mandrel and not worry about it.
what kind of fails have you experienced with yours?
I've had them explode on the wood lathe, literally just fly apart.
True story. I was there.
I've dug into them to the point where you couldn't save it. I've heated the sandpaper up so much by pressing so hard that it'll literally make the glue fall apart. Botched it so that it couldn't be fixed.
Gouged it.
Yep.
You had some gouges and a couple that you were turning originally.
Cut them not straight so that, oh, that looks great. And then you turn it and you see the angle on it. And you're like, oh, yeah, I didn't cut that right.
Yeah. That was our biggest issue, is trying to get the cuts right. That was
So that when you look at it from any angle, they are where they're supposed to be.
they were straight instead of leaning or kind of doing some random stuff.
I've glued them backwards before.
What do you
Not
mean?
paying attention.
Oh, putting the wrong pieces together? Yeah. That
And then you
happens.
go to put the rest on, you go, oh, that's not going to match up.
I did that with Alice when I was putting her together. The trim bands that I had, I had big thick colors at the end of the overlay, and I wasn't paying. It was late at night. I had a drink or two, and I was
three.
gluing EVA up and wasn't paying attention. I was listening to music and jamming and everything. And I looked down and I'm like, because I had just slammed it together, and I was like trying to peel it apart. If you catch it in the right window, you can get it apart, but most of the time you destroy everything.
It's probably going to rip.
The contact cement's going to rip it up. The other crappy part of it is that, once you touch that contact cement, you better have it lined up perfectly, or it's just going to, and you're never going to get it apart again. I've had...
Which I told one of the kids that was at the gathering we just had, that once you touch it, that's it.
Yeah.
And the first thing he did was not pay attention, and, oh! It's done now.
You got to
Like,
put
it's
it on
over.
there as is.
That's it. You can't fix it? Nope. That's a trash grip now.
Just got to deal with it. And the consequences of not paying attention.
What's some of the things you've done outside of like what you were talking about with Alice?
What, like screwed up with fails? Oh, Lord. So, glued things up the wrong way. The other thing that I did was when I was, the two overlays that I practiced on, I got one of them too hot as I was sanding it down, and which actually was this one, Alice. I actually twisted the core, and it turned on me completely, and there's no way to fix that, because once it cooled down, it's done. Like, it's just going to stay like that. And it was like, oh my God. I've ripped pieces out of EVA before. I haven't had one completely explode on me, but I have had the seams kind of start to kind of separate when they got too hot, and you just stick them back together and let it cool off for a little bit. Not cut pieces the same width and go to put them in inlays, and one section is the size I want it, and the other one's too thin because of the way I was cutting it.
Well, it was also before we upgraded our bandsaw too.
It was before I upgraded the bandsaw, and the bandsaw's got a lot nicer. Well, we upgraded the bandsaw. We got different blades, and you have to clean it on the regular because that EVA dust will just chew up a blade real fast.
And then you'll go to use it, and
Oh, I had it explode on me not long ago. I was like, because when that happens, that's a scary sound.
oh yeah, well, it's running at 1,000 RPMs or more.
Yeah. And it just ding, and you're like, oh my God. Glad that there's a lot of stuff covering that.
Safety.
Yeah.
Safety first.
Always have safety.
Safety glasses, a shield, something.
A push
Keep
stick.
your fingers away from the blade.
Keep your fingers away from it. Turn it off. Unplug it before you open it. Like, do all the things. I really think that's the only thing I've done with fails. Or just most of mine are gluing them wrong.
So one thing that we always get asked is, we'll use any color of EVA, be it white, black, red, blue, green, orange, yellow, tie-dyed.
I should have grabbed
There's
it. It's sitting over
bear
there.
swirls. There's all different colors, shapes, sizes. But a lot of people tell us they won't use white EVA because, well, it gets dirty. Yes, so does your body after working. But you take a shower and you clean yourself just like you would clean the grips. All it takes is a little effort, a little bit of scrubbing, and they're fine. Now, how do you clean grips?
I use Dawn dish soap and water and just clean them up.
Yep. And it literally, we haven't found one that it hasn't cleaned up yet.
No, we built one. We had somebody else turn the grips. Billy turned the grips. He did white and blue for the rod. And it was in a kaleidoscope pattern. So it was two different colors just kind of swirling together. The guy he'd fished it for a couple years at that point.
3 or 4 years straight.
Brought it back. The grip was gross looking. I mean, it was dirty.
Feral.
But I had pictures. I shared in Southern talking about it, and I had cleaned them up and gone from. I took pictures side by side with the original, and then the cleaned up ones, and they were just as white as they were the first day. So, hey Wayne, thanks for the comment. So for saltwater rods out here in the West, people rail the grips and it leaves a dent in the EVA or will pop the glue seam. For rods that are lighter, EVA is awesome. So yes, rail rods are definitely not EVA
One
friendly.
thing I have had where, I've had one on a rail of a pier or on a boat and it leaves a dent. Bring it back, get a hairdryer, and heat it up. 9 times out of 10, that dent will all but disappear.
Gotta be low and slow.
Yep.
Low and slow.
Just because if you heat it too much, it gets that I don't know if you've ever burnt foam, but it gets like a very crusty topping on it.
It's shiny. It gets shiny and then it turns into sandpaper.
But heat will help that dent go back to normal.
But it's definitely not a material I'd use for those rail rods either, because you're
It
going to
would
have
be-
dramas.
I'd be using something like this, which is another form of foam.
Well, we can't get Hypalon anymore. We just happen to have it because your grandfather was a collector. I call him a collector. A hoarder sounds rude. Wayne also said boiling water works too. Yes, if you want to dip it in.
Yep.
Sure.
Or just pour it on it.
Yep, we'll pour it on there. Pop it right back out. I mean, that's pretty much with EVA. If you're gonna get serious about it and start turning and doing all these inlays and.
But you can also go EVA to cork,
Oh yeah.
EVA to wood, EVA to any other media to make the grip that you want to happen. So you could take this and put wood ends on it, or acrylic, or anything you could really think of. It's just different glues you would have to use to do so.
But you have to keep in mind it's going to turn differently.
Yep.
Because the densities are different. So you'll have, the EVA is going to turn fast and the wood is going to turn slow. So when you start mixing stuff, it becomes a little precarious. You got to be really careful about how you're turning it. Basically, I want to touch back on the beginner friendly stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the inlays, and we're assuming when we start talking about that when we're dealing with the blocks, which the block, gluing it back together
Mm-hmm.
is much simpler than it is to work with the already turned
Mm-hmm.
EVA. But a lot of people want to dabble in the process of figuring out, do I want to invest that kind of money in
Mm-hmm.
machines, and, if they have the space available. So you buy a couple pre-turned, shaped
Mm-hmm.
to, black grips.
Mm-hmm.
And they also have they've got all the round, what are they calling them? There's like the Vera swirl that looks like
Mm-hmm.
wood grain. They've got the kind of the chippy looking ones where it's a bunch of color and it looks like if, the stuff you throw on concrete, like the flakes,
Yeah, yeah.
but it's all mixed together. I
Mhm.
think it's Tom Salanto, I believe, who sells it. I can't remember. But
Maybe, yeah.
and, so if you're getting all these round
Mm-hmm.
EVA pieces, what's the simplest way? I know you said the braid earlier, like when they start cutting everything apart, how would they glue it back together without it getting stuck to the object they're using to align it?
Wax.
Wax on what? Like when we were gluing up the circles for that particular grip, like walk me through.
I mean, you can put it on a dowel rod. You can put it on a metal mandrel, or you could put it on a blank.
But you need to be able to release it.
Put a wax below it. I can't remember the wax that we use, but
It's paraffin wax.
paraffin. And we literally just take it and rub it all over it, like as much as you can, and then put it on there.
We used what did we use? We didn't use the blank when we were putting that grip together.
Which one?
The feather one that we used on the International Challenge.
No, I did it by feel.
Oh, you stuck it together that way?
Like I literally was just taking it and would hold it and just kind of turn it.
Ooh, that's rough. If you do it on
Because,
some...
if it gets off a little, just don't have it reamed all the way yet. Because then you can go back in, fix the center, and then put it on and do the final sand.
Wayne says he uses stainless steel rods and waxes them.
Yep. That's where those kind of fake mandrels that we have, that's where those came from.
Yeah.
Is me doing that type of stuff.
That's the easiest way.
It's just stainless rod. A threaded rod would work. Because you can wax that, like, same way you do with the birch bark.
Mm-hmm. As long as you have the wax on there, it's going to...
Mm-hmm. It's going to release. Now, it may catch in some places, but
rocket
for the most part, it's going to release.
And that's the good thing about EVA. Like, once it's glued together and you've got all that stuff tight and pressed so everything is matching up the way it's supposed to, you're really not going to...
But, if somebody step away from, like, doing the round stuff, if you want to do blocks and say you don't have a wood lathe or a metal lathe or a bandsaw or anything like that, you can still do blocks and turn it on your power wrapper.
But which power wrappers are capable of that? There's only a few. Not all of them.
All of them can do it. They can do it.
Mm-hmm.
But what you're going to do is you're going to take that block, make it how you would, how we would normally take a block and make the grip.
Mm-hmm.
But then you've got to cut all those corners off and get it as close to round as possible before you put it on the power wrapper.
If they don't have a bandsaw, how are they going to cut the corners off?
People have chop saws and skill saws and hand saws.
That's not safe. I wouldn't do that.
There's ways to do it. That's all I'm saying. There's ways to do it to find out if you want to invest the money to go further into it.
I think the best way is to find a buddy shop and be like, hey, can I borrow your bandsaw for a little bit? Because chop saw and trying to cut corners like that sounds really dangerous. I'm sure more people are more capable.
Grab a belt sander.
And skill. Well, you probably could.
Most everybody that's getting into rod building has some way to do this.
Somebody was... Now, I don't know if it would work on EVA. I don't see why it wouldn't. Because I sand EVA, like when I'm doing these overlays and I'm trying to put these pieces back in there, I'll actually take a Dremel and sand off the scrappy parts.
Tim does it that way. When he was doing it, I think that's who told me about it. He said he would put it on the power wrapper and take a Dremel and just while it's turning.
I know that Jordan Harris does it with cork. Or I believe he was doing it at one point with cork.
I've heard of a bunch of people taking a Dremel, putting the power wrapper on full blast, and just... There's ways to do it.
And cheaper versus...
That you don't have to go out and spend... Well, we got lucky with that.
We got a deal on that. Don't play. That was only $300. It's
I
normally
mean, what
like
can I say? I cruise Craigslist.
it's
for
like
deals,
1,200
so.
for that lathe. But we got the wood lathe off Craigslist, and
For
the
$250.
bandsaw was on sale
Mm-hmm.
when I bought it, but I still spent like 600
It was
on
like
it.
600-700 for the bandsaw.
It wasn't cheap, and then I got
But we started out with a like $150 Ryobi one, and I mean it got the job done. It wasn't the best, but we did these with the Ryobi.
No, we didn't.
You did.
No, we didn't. It's the Raycon. Those were the Raycon.
No, we just recently got the Ryobi.
These were. We just got that before iCast 2 years ago. That was cut with a Raycon. Promise you. Because remember, the belt broke shortly after I got back. Or not the belt, the blade broke. And I hadn't ordered the extras that I was supposed to order. And so I had to go drive 45 minutes on a Sunday with my 2 kids up to Charlotte to go buy another one so I could keep moving on with my grips. These weren't done with the Ryobi, I promise you.
This one was.
That one absolutely was. That one was. All of these previous
Like
ones.
it can
This
be
one.
done. Just.
As we bicker about what time frame that was done.
I mean, I don't remember what I did yesterday. So.
I promise you. I remember I was using that one because that was the first. That was the first set, basically breaking in that one, the Raycon. Because then I was like, "That's ugly. I'm going to do that." So.
But you don't have to spend thousands of dollars to get into it. You can do this with probably what you have at your shop.
Mm-hmm. You just got to figure out a way
to do it,
to adapt the process to it. And then also be wary, like when you do start doing inlays, and I usually tell people to start with the random abstract stuff, because as you put material in, just like woodworking or anything like that, you have to take material out in order for it to line up. I know you're wincing your eye at me because I had a set that I worked on that I did not take the material out, and it ended up lining up better. But if you want your block that you started with to stay straight, and instead of having it adjust here and there and go wider or whatever, you have to take out material in order to get it to line up. And, when you start turning, if you're not somebody like me personally, I didn't have a whole lot of experience in turning anything. So when we're working with the skew, I realized I was holding it wrong for a long time. Found that out at Foley when I went down there this year.
Foley.
Is it Foley?
I don't know.
Foley? I don't know, but Foley. But went down there for the gathering, and Billy was talking about turning stuff on the lathe, and that's whenever he was like, "Dude, you're holding it wrong. You need to just use the actual point of it, and stop trying to shape it with that. Take just the corners off and let the sandpaper do all the rest of the work." So I was like, "Oh, okay, makes sense."
Mm-hmm.
Changed a few things, came back, and actually doing better, so that was good. But it's gonna, particularly when you start working with grips and turning stuff on your own, you're going to have to just be aware that you're going to waste some product. And if you don't want to waste it on, the blocks that you buy or the round already pre-turned grips that you buy, like go buy some cheap like yoga blocks, like the mats.
Something just to play with.
Even just the craft foam. Like if you just want to like laminate them all together, which is a fancy term for like literally stacking them and then cutting it into a block shape. Like you could have a multi-layered thing doing that. Craft foam is a little soft for what we use, but if you're going to laminate a ton of it together, like 10 pieces, it'll probably straighten up a little bit. And then you can just kind of play around with it and get used to it, but it's cheaper, so you're not wasting the expensive stuff. I don't really recommend using craft foam for inlays or anything like that because it's a lot less dense than the blocks or the pre-shaped things that are on the market. But it is an inexpensive way to kind of play around with stuff.
We did it.
Mm-hmm. I had a whole ton of it. I was just stacking it together and just playing around, seeing what happened. All of those have hit the trash because, as we explained earlier, we were cutting things wrong, gluing things wrong, turning things wrong. You're just going to have to sit there and play with it. So I just want to take a minute and thank American Tackle for being an awesome sponsor for the podcast. If you haven't checked out any of their products, like the Waves guides, for instance, as Wes is showcasing on his shirt. Microwave guides help in increasing casting and lessen the line slap. A lot of the blanks I have been working on lately have been from American Tackle, anywhere from their Atrex blanks, which are actually cart blanks, but they're usable here in the States for surf rods.
Matrix.
Bushidos. and Bushido's in-house, and so far I've been highly impressed
The
with that.
ATX live bait blanks in particular.
The ATX live bait blank is awesome. I do like that blank. I actually have a couple sitting over there to build. But
Big fans.
great company to hang out with and talk to.
What is episode 5 going to be?
It'll be a different grip problem. We're probably I think we're gonna have to go into leather grips so Wes can get the itch out of his system, explaining to you guys how awesome leather is, even though it's not a material that is popular because we've just kind of started working with it.
To be.
We favor it, so we're a little biased. So if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel, it's The Decorative Studio, and you can find me on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. Everything's The Decorative Studio. So thank you. Y'all have a great night, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.